We're on the air.
Ooh, don't do that.
I bring the meeting of the Longville Township Planning Board to order. Could we please have the intros and call to a statement of compliance?
Absolutely. Call to order and statement of compliance. Adequate notice of this meeting hearing has been provided by posting a copy of the public meeting dates on the municipal bulletin board and website, by sending a copy to the Echo Sentinel newspaper, and by filing a copy with the municipal clerk. Number 2, meeting cutoff. Announcement is made that as a matter of procedure, it is the intention of the planning board not to continue any matter past 10:30 p.m. at any regular or special meeting or hearing of the board unless a motion is passed by the members then present to extend the meeting or hearing to a later specified cutoff time. Number 3, electronic devices. All in attendance are asked to mute cell phones or any electronic devices as to not interrupt the proceedings. Number 4, pledge of allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Roll call. I don't have a pen. Anyway. Deputy Mayor Lavender.
Present.
Committeeman Ray is excused this evening. Ms. Still?
Present.
Mr. Hands?
Here.
Mr. Malinowski?
Here.
Mr. Opalka?
Here.
Mr. Sandow is currently absent. Vice Chairman Jones?
Present.
Chairman Richardson?
Here.
There we go.
Chairman, we have a quorum. Quorum.
She's been practicing.
I'm not messing it up again.
She's got a notepad over there.
Great, so our first agenda item, item number 6, is review and approval of the meeting minutes of April 9th, 2024. For those who were present, any comments, suggested changes? If not, is there a motion to accept these minutes?
So moved. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Great. The next item is item number 7, which is the draft
Item
and
number 8.
hopefully final resolution.
Item number 8.
No, I think you're on the wrong.
Oh, I'm still on
Yes.
April 9th. Okay.
Yes, I'm sorry. This is the April 23rd. It's April 23rd.
I got it. Thanks.
24.
So we have a resolution that's been drafted for the Falzarano Family Trust, application number 24-05P, sorry. Hopefully, everyone has had a chance to review this. This was distributed earlier today. If not, you can take a moment to look through it.
Mr. Chair, I think there's only a certain number of individuals that can vote on
Correct.
this.
Yep.
There's also a typo in the first sentence.
Yeah, so let's,
Peter.
Oh, Pater.
Peter.
I saw one, application number should be 24-05P instead of 24-05P at the top block there. I just noticed that one as well.
okay, yes, 24-05P.
Correct.
Okay.
Hopefully it's just a few
Yep.
minor misspellings and nothing substantive. One other thing I noticed on page 3, we have Fred Zelli's old business address in there from when he was at a different firm. So that's got to get corrected to 425 Eagle Rock Ave, Suite 200, Roseland, New Jersey, which I can easily plug in. I don't see any changes. And while I'm on the soapbox here, I'll just mention to the board, this was an application for minor subdivision approval to adjust the common boundary lines between the 3 existing lots there. There was lot 15, lot 44, and lot 50. The proposal was to adjust the common boundary between 44 and 50, take it to the west, bisecting lot 15, cutting lot 15 into 2 lots, and then each of those 2 portions would be apportioned to lots 44 and 50, thus creating, going from 3 lots to 2 lots that are much larger. And there's a few items of bulk, well, one item of bulk variance relief just to permit the continued presence of an existing shed that was on Lot 15 and would be on proposed Lot 50.01. So that's really the application in a nutshell.
So in the resolution 6, the relocation of the shed
6,
on page 9,
paragraph 6.
yes,
Okay.
uh,
Oh, in the decision section, okay.
in the decision section.
Yes.
I believe that on page 8 in paragraph 24, it says that the proposal would result in the elimination of the non-conforming condition posed by the deficient 8.9-foot side yard setback. So
Correct.
if that happens, then they don't need to relocate the shed, right?
No,
Am I
by,
reading it incorrectly?
yeah, by virtue of them stipulating to relocating the shed and that being a condition, you're therefore eliminating that non-conforming condition.
Okay.
Right. Make sense?
Yep.
Okay.
Okay, I guess other than some cleanup of a few typos and the adjustment of that, is there a motion to approve this resolution from one of the eligible voters? You can see in the last chart there, the folks that are eligible to vote on this particular resolution.
Motion to approve with the noted corrections.
Second?
Roll call.
Deputy Mayor Lavender,
Yes.
Vice Chairman Jones,
Yes.
Mr. Malinowski,
Yes.
Mr. Opalka,
Yes.
motion carries.
And I get to vote too.
Oh,
Got the big
I'm
boss.
sorry. Yeah, I forgot Chairman Richardson.
Yes.
Still screwed up. I can't.
At least you didn't get his
I'll
name
get
right.
on your
In my
radar
head,
screen one
I'm
of these
looking at it, and
days.
I thought,
One of these days.
Maybe you should sit down there.
Sit right next to
Yeah, right?
Exactly. That's what she misses. I used to sit next to you.
it's gotta be.
Okay, great.
Oh,
Yes.
thank you.
That was just a banner?
Yes.
Excellent. Okay, so our next, and this is the more significant discussion for this evening, is going into a work session tied to ordinance development. And the way I'd like to structure this is to first have Ms. Lehaney to talk a little bit about a primer on the ordinance development process, just to kind of ground everyone on the board. I know it's going to be review for a lot of us, but it doesn't hurt to at least see this in its colored glory, right?
That's correct.
Well, she got a flow chart going.
Yeah.
Wow.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Heavy paper. Poster board.
And we can-
Nice, good stock load on
And
it.
we can make this available
Thank you.
in the minutes, or up on the website for folks at home
Sure.
to see at their leisure. So, Liz, if you wouldn't mind taking it away and speaking to this ordinance development process, and then we'll turn it over to Tom.
Okay, so I'm just gonna do some bullet points, and you can read some of the finer print later, because I think it's too much if you try to take it all in at once. But obviously, the first thing is the ordinance is drafted, and that can be done by this board, can be done by the township committee, and it could be done by anybody authorized to do so. It can be done by your professionals, it can be done by the board, you know, it comes from anywhere. I mean, that, you know, anyone can be authorized to prepare it. But one thing just to note is we couldn't sort of make these ordinance changes until we had adopted the land use plan element, and that the housing plan element had been adopted a few years ago, but with the recent adoption of the master plan, we're now able to make some of these ordinance changes because we can then, as you'll see later on, check for consistency. So once the ordinance is drafted, you know, and I think sometimes people get confused that, of course, this board doesn't adopt ordinances. I think so, particularly even during the master plan adoption process, I think some people, not necessarily on the board, were getting confused, and I understand why. But it really, it comes out of the township committee, And the first they have what's called a first reading of the ordinance, and they don't have to read the whole ordinance. They could just do, you know, this is an ordinance that does X. And they have to sort of agree to kind of pass it on the first round, and it's not adopting, but it's sort of saying, okay, we're taking this as drafted and we're moving into the next stages. So one other thing to note, just because if this becomes an issue, the way, and I don't know if it's case law or if it's just law, it has to be introduced and adopted by the same governing body, and by that I mean, so you can't, let's say, reorg is in January, you can't have first reading in December, and then a new group comes in January.
Right.
It has to all be first and second reading and adoption and public hearing, all with the same group of people. So once you have first reading, that's when everything sort of goes to the public. It has to be published in the newspaper in its entirety, or, you know, essentially by title and summary. And it also has to provide for the location and the time of the second reading, which usually is where you have the public hearing. And copies are posted and made available. I think, I'm not sure where, Deb, you may know if they're posted on a bulletin board in this building.
I think we just keep copies at the clerk's office. I don't know that we actually hang it up on the bulletin board. I've not seen that done.
Okay, all right, so, but then, you know, it has to be made available to the general public for no fee, you know, people have to be able to.
I mean, we always post on the website and have copies available.
So it's an electronic bulletin board.
Correct.
Thank you.
So then, the TC by law has to refer to this board, the ordinance, for review and master plan consistency. And this board has 35 days to do it, and I think the 35 days allows for, you know, sometimes the way schedules of the meetings run, let's say the township committee, you know, I'm gonna make it up, but they meet tomorrow and they do a first reading, then that gives us enough time to do everything by the next time we meet. And basically this board, we've done this before, has to evaluate the ordinance and whether or not it's inconsistent with the master plan. And I think I guess Steve once said, it's like, you can find it consistent, inconsistent, or not inconsistent.
Right, it's a double negative, yeah.
Right.
Yeah, so.
That is the standard. It's
But
very
hopefully
consistent.
it's all consistent. I mean, that's the best option. And the township committee can't adopt the ordinance until, the planning board has made this report, or if the planning board has made the report, they need to review it and consider it before they adopt it. Let's say you all find that it's really, inconsistent. They can still adopt it, but it has to be a majority of the full council, so, who would be eligible.
Right.
But if you guys don't the planning board doesn't act within 35 days, then the township committee can just go ahead.
Right.
They don't have to come back. You have a window, and if you don't meet it, then you're on.
Right.
Nobody cares. So then right before, then you have a 10-day notice prior to the second reading. And this is all, I guess, done by your clerk, who files notice with the county planning board, and if any properties within 200 feet of the municipal boundary, then those property owners and that municipality gets noticed. So that's something, whatever, that's not unusual. So I did this is a very simplified thing that I feel like every time I've worked on rezonings, it becomes an issue, which is the notice, which is who gets notice. Because there's a classification change, and there's questions of what does that really mean? Is that changing the permitted uses? Is that changing the intensity of the uses? Let's say you go from 2-story maximum height to 20-story maximum height. And then there's changing the actual zone boundary. And a classification change, it's just, did I get that wrong? Is it properties within the zone?
Yeah, within the zone, and I think also within 200 feet
All
of
right,
the zone as well.
I think I did this backwards on
Yeah.
here, so I apologize.
Right,
And then
okay.
if it's a zone boundary change, I wrote that it was property owners in the zone and then within 200 feet of the zone.
Mhm.
And so that can be quite significant because it's not only, let's say you only care about one of the R2s, it has to be every R2 in the municipality and everybody within 200 feet of the boundary of every R2. And so that, at times, can get, well, it gets costly, honestly, for the municipality because all of these people
Right.
have to get
Sure.
noticed.
It's even crazier when you get into like homeowners associations and apartments and things like that, and you have to notify every single person within the apartment building. It's, yeah.
So, I will say that it's something to consider when planning for ordinances because you don't want to have to keep sending out humongous notices to so many people. So it's, in some ways, better to consolidate. But once everybody is noticed, within the 10-day window or, prior to the 10 days, then there's the second reading and that's when the public hearing and that's when, members of the public are invited to speak. And this again in front of the township committee. And then at the conclusion of the public hearing, the township committee can either, adopt it, they can reject it, or they can say, well, we have revisions. And if the revisions are substantial enough, and that usually is a lawyer determination,
Judgment call, really,
Yeah.
fact sensitive.
you have to go back, kind of, it's not completely redone, but it's basically has to go back to first reading.
It's essentially treated as if, practically speaking, it's treated as if it's a whole new ordinance, and you have to
Yeah.
kind of start from, at least from the noticing procedures. I
But
think,
you would have to go back to the first reading
Yeah.
step.
I believe that's the second reading hearing. All right, let's say you get an ordinance, it comes back to second read, you make substantial changes. That meeting would then constitute the first reading, and then you can jump into the notice, but you'd still have to start from the notice and
Yeah,
everything.
so but
Yeah.
it's like,
Right.
Right.
yes. And then once, it doesn't take effect immediately, it only takes effect once it's been a notice that it was adopted, is, put in the newspaper.
Right.
And also filed with the county. And that's, sometimes ordinances will say this doesn't take effect until blah, but
Mhm.
usually it's just, it doesn't take, by law, it just doesn't take effect until it's, notice. So, so that's it,
Right.
that's the process.
Good. Any questions from the board? Any other comments?
Yeah. So just to kind of estimate the work that's in front of us, I had several questions. How many ordinances do we anticipate that we're drafting and passing?
I think we're gonna talk
Yeah.
about that next. That's part two.
Yeah, so that's an unknown
Yeah.
number right now, because I haven't gotten a full list of
How about a
ordinances.
high-low,
It's gonna be a high number.
Yeah, I would think it's.
I can't even give you a number,
from like 5 to 20?
no more than that.
Okay, so that's a lot. That's a couple of years.
Yeah,
All right.
I'm gonna say in excess of 50.
All right, and then as far as figuring out, what the timeline is for one ordinance, if the planning board is drafting it and sending it to the committee, best case, we review it, we agree with you, we send something back, you get it at your next meeting, we could potentially turn it around in 35 days, right?
Right, yeah.
I guess it really depends on the structure. When does the township committee meet?
Second and fourth Wednesdays,
Second was.
right?
They're right after.
Right.
Right.
Okay. All right, well, they have two
we
meetings a
meet
month.
usually
Well,
the night before.
So the question is, like, it's a pipeline, right? How many are you comfortable doing per cycle,
I see.
right?
Mhm.
And, then we can figure out
Yeah.
how much time it's going to take to chew through this. How many ordinances, Tom, have you identified already?
So I right now have 2 for sure,
Mhm.
and that is the signs in residential zones,
Mhm.
the business signs in residential zones, and also the shed at 100 square feet. Those are
Okay.
2, and those are 2 small ones, right?
Right.
You would think within 45 days after we start the process, that it would be an
Yeah.
ordinance, from front to back.
Right.
But there's going to be more complicated ordinances that is gonna take more time, because it's going to be, we get it, we do what we do, talk about it, make decisions, make revisions, make decisions before we finally have a piece of artifact that we can send up to the TC saying, yep, we're good with this, we've agreed. We send it up to the TC. TC does the first read, then it's gonna be another 2 weeks if there's no iterations coming back to the planning board. If it comes back to the board, we do the process again, and then it goes back up to the TC, and if the TC then has to redo another first reading, and then if there's no coming back to us, then it waits until it comes to second reading, where then you have feedback from the public. And if it's deemed that it needs to go back to the planning board for yet another revision, then you could see this thing going 120 days,
Right.
easy.
I think minimum would be 90, and,
Yeah,
Right.
I'm thinking
That's if
45 is
everything goes well.
is overly optimistic.
well, I think 45 for the more simple ones,
Right.
I think is doable.
And I say simple with a
Yeah.
caveat, because even if it looks simple, all of a sudden it could morph into something.
So where I was going from that then is, tactics to get through this efficiently and with as least friction as possible and the most agreeableness. It'd be good to have a couple members from the planning board at the TC meetings where these are being talked about, because
Oh,
we'll
yeah.
ask you to come up and
Yes.
answer
That's what I have
questions. And
done.
secondly, on first reading, we're not required to let the public have input. And that's generally the rule,
Yeah,
right? But
part of the
in
process.
radioactive situations, we might allow it,
Right.
right?
That's because
And it
of
might
that-
be to your benefit,
Save yourself from having to make substantial changes. in the site.
well, prevent false narratives
Yeah, we have,
from taking root and,
Mhm.
slowing things down. And just in rare cases, we've opened it up like that. People have misunderstandings about things. Why wouldn't we squash the misunderstandings and really explain what the intent is? So as long as you're okay with that, we kind of tuck that as a way as a, one option when things just get a little bit,
sure.
That time may always arise, that may show itself.
Yeah.
It's,
and the public
Your
expects you to be
discretion.
reasonable and they'd like to comment, and we're
Mhm.
like, all right, well,
Mhm.
fair enough, that's what we'll do. But we're not going to do that in every case because it just grinds everything to a halt.
correct.
But
Liz,
imagine,
on the 35 days, I just want to make sure I'm understanding it correctly, that we have 35 days. We don't need to take 35 days. So presumably, if we're drafting it and there hasn't been public comment yet, we can get it then 2 weeks later, or no? Yeah,
It's got
because
to,
your agenda would have to be,
so let's say you gave us something tomorrow, and we reviewed it, we passed it on first reading. So then when's the next meeting here?
In 2 weeks.
2 weeks, or sometimes 3.
Right. And then our next meeting has to pass, and then it's the meeting after that. So it would be the second meeting in May that it would be finalized.
I'm just hoping that we, like, in the few years, I feel like all the ordinances we get, we haven't drafted, so we actually have had to do that analysis, but hopefully we won't have to do like a super deep
Right.
analysis about whether it complies or not, because
We'll
we
have
will
already
have drafted
drafted
it,
it, right.
you know, so.
The key
So that
here,
should save some time.
Yeah, hopefully.
the key here is to keep the pipeline filled.
Yes.
yeah,
We ought to have
Yeah.
a couple ordinances, maybe, 3 or 4 even, if they're small. We should have ordinances every meeting. So as long as you're keeping that pipeline filled, then we're making progress. But where things stall and we don't see something for a month and a half.
well, let's just see how it
And
goes.
that-
I would
and
say
that
that's
all is
intent,
predicated
but,
on applications,
yeah, I
because the
wouldn't,
board has to then
Yeah.
address
you
applications.
may want to bundle some up together, so
That's exactly it.
so I wouldn't,
I would
was-
start as soon as possible.
Yeah.
yeah, certainly start. Just on prior, not, so anything, I'm going to flip it around for 2 seconds. So the intention, when it comes from the township committee, we always struggle a little bit there, and I think many occasions we've had some ordinance come down from township committee, and we've always said, well, we need that intention, some sort of description as to what it is, because often it's just a text.
So we have talked about this many times about having something from the township committee. So I would add a little box in here. If it comes from township committee, include an explanation letter to us so we know what the intent is.
I don't expect anything to come from the township committee after all the work that this body's
No,
put
I
in.
understand, but
And I know that it could, and we should account
it has
for that.
just past experience, and it always gets into the last minute as well because it ends up we have to do it today so you can have your second reading tomorrow.
Yeah.
So,
And
so
so,
best intentions still
But there's
practicality.
always going to be that.
and then
There's
last point before I stop talking, because Lyd says all has to happen this fiscal year, right? So there's a cutoff of probably first meeting in November.
There isn't. You get done what you get done. You just
Right.
can't start something in December and adopt it in
Correct.
January.
The efforts of, the efforts
Right.
to, the efforts to draft in this calendar year can be advanced next year with the start of the first reading,
Right.
second.
Yeah.
But we can't do the first reading in 1 year and second.
Right.
So like maybe a cutoff date of like no more first readings past this point. Let's
That's
not
right.
waste our time.
Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
realistically, that's,
Yeah.
right, that's the
First-
first meeting of November.
Right.
Yeah.
Unless you have to get done by the end of the year.
True, yeah.
Yeah.
So
yes.
even if the composition of the body doesn't change, you still have that cutoff.
Yeah, it's reorg, and so, for example,
Okay.
if a town, some towns do reorg on July 1st, and so it's the same thing, they can't start, like, have first reading in June and second reading in July.
Okay.
But is that the reorg, like, that shouldn't be for us, that should
No,
be for
we're
the township.
January.
Right.
I'm
right?
sorry, you're
So-
January, I'm just giving you an example.
Right.
No, no,
Yeah,
I'm
Right.
saying, I'm saying it's not our reorg that
That's
matters.
township
It's,
committee.
there's new elections,
It's the
right?
township committee's.
Township
reorg,
committee.
yes.
Right.
Are there any elections this year? I'm like,
But it's best if you can the same people, does it or does the position matter?
It does.
You're reconstituting a new
Yes.
body. It's essentially a new governing body every year.
Even though it's the same people.
Yes.
oh, okay, so it does matter, okay.
Okay, that's good to know.
Okay, any other questions on the process? Thank you, Liz, for pulling this together.
Thank you,
Very
yes.
helpful.
No, the deputy mayor took my question. Thanks.
Well, actually, I do have one more, just so, the complications of getting the notice out to all those different parties, how much do we worry about that, or is that the clerk?
It's the clerk,
Okay.
it just becomes really costly.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just, that's the thing I caution, because, you know, if you wanna have a certain level of assurance that it's gonna be adopted.
Right.
Because if you do the notice and then everybody, you know, it's like, wait, what? It's like you've spent all this money and it was for nothing.
If you do some thoughtful bundling, does
Yeah,
that
Sure.
save?
Yeah,
Sure.
for
Exactly.
sure.
Okay, so
Yeah.
that would make sense to think
Yeah.
strategically about bundling.
But that's more sorry, that's more to zone wholesale zone changes as opposed to individual
Right. well,
stuff.
we're-
So
it-
that's got to be relatively rarish.
Correct, but it, you know, for example, some people will get noticed and they'll find out they're going into
R2
R3.
instead of
R2,
R3.
right, or, you know, and their minimum lot size is now
Sure.
10,000 square feet and was 20. And they, I mean, and I don't mean this in any negative ways, that most people are gonna go, what? You know, like, well, how does this apply to me?
Sure.
Unless they're really well versed in zoning.
Right.
And so they potentially will come out because it involves their property,
So we should, yeah.
yeah.
So for example, using the signage for a home business and residential, how many zones of residential does that apply to?
All of them.
Okay, so to your point, when we send out a notice, if there's something else that applies to the whole town, we should be thinking, doing that all at once.
But that doesn't impact us.
No, that's,
No, it's only change in geographical change as opposed to
Right.
things within.
you only get that individual type of notice if it's like impacting your property.
Yeah.
Or you're within 200 feet of the zone boundary. I know it sounds a little strange, but like something like changing the size of the shed would just be a typical note. Deb doesn't do it, the clerk would do it, but
Right.
it's not like every single person in the town is
Right.
gonna get
Right, but
notice.
200 feet of the zoning boundary, if you think about how many little individual zones there are in town, if if you're 200 feet of those, that's going to be a large portion of the town, is what I mean. So even though it's not specifically that you have to send it to everybody, when you're talking about 200 feet of all those lines over the deputy mayor's head, it's quite clear that we're going to be doing this for a lot. So if there's other things,
But why don't you just be clear what when the mass mailing needs to go out on the zoning? Because what situations?
It's a classification change, which is the uses,
Mhm.
you know, Chris, please pipe
Yeah.
in.
Yeah.
And then
you're good.
sometimes I think case law has said if you really change the bulk requirements,
Right.
you
Yeah.
know, like you're allowing,
I think it'd be good to have the rule that, so we're not doing it unnecessarily, but there may be those specific situations that we should then be very conscious of
Yes.
when we do the ordinances, because
Right.
they have a bigger
So-
impact.
yes, that's kind of what I was going for. If there's
Yeah.
something else that's
Yeah.
on the list that might be something along those lines, we bump it up to be something that we do 2 or 3.
all right, yeah, go ahead.
So, I want to try to explain this and see if I'm, like, on the same page as everybody. Zone changes, if you say to somebody in the R4 zone, we're changing your zone to an R2 zone, just for example. When you're doing a zone change, whoever in that in that area, not the whole zone, like, because there's R4 zones all over the place.
Right.
So if you're taking just a small portion of a zone,
Yeah.
you're gonna change that zone. Then the notices are extensive, you have to send to 200 foots because it's affecting specific properties. And correct me if I'm wrong, what we're talking about here, zoning changes are basically changing the rules. So we're updating the zone, so that's not an
Right.
extensive notice.
Right.
Those are notices that have to be sent to the paper and maybe surrounding municipalities. But we don't send anything out to homeowners, let's say, like Liz is talking about, we're talking about changing signs in residential zones, sheds, and there's also a fence that I want to add to that. There's a problem with the fence one too, but I digress. But, you know, because that's happening in every zone, R2, R4, R3, you don't have to send notices to everybody in those zones. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah,
So-
it's just a way that it was, when I was reading through it, it made it sound like anyone who was within 200 feet of a border of that zone
Right,
needed
that's why
it.
I
That's why I
wanted to
was
clarify.
getting, okay,
Yeah, that's why I wanted
So
to
what-
clarify.
This is really very basic.
sure,
No,
but,
no, and I
It's fine.
understand, but it's bulleted. I mean, it's very nuanced and quite complicated, to
It
be
does.
honest, like who
Yeah.
gets noticed.
totally, and that's why I just wanted to make sure that if we were talking about some of these things, that there was some consideration
This is
to.
why we have
So I-
talented professionals to help us
Yeah.
strategically.
So if I think if I understood Tom correctly, Tom, you're building a spreadsheet that's going to list all these things, and I know you probably have columns in there that specify them on level of difficulty and complexity, and are these quick or are these going to be long? Right? And so you're going to prioritize them for the board so that we get through them as efficiently as possible.
Yes, there's going to be a whole approach on how we tackle the recommendations from within the master plan, as well as the ordinances that we need to look at and make adjustments to. And I just made a notation to myself. So as we develop and work through each of these items, then I'm going to create some additional columns where we say, is this a notification to paper? Is this notification to resident? Is it notification to other municipalities?
Yep.
And why am I doing that? It's so that way, as we're going through the process, it's the streamline, right? We're ticking the boxes as we go. So like a mental checklist, because I'm not going to remember this every single time. I need to look at a spreadsheet with rows and columns
Right.
so I can put that.
And so one other thing is, like you did with the master plan, you're probably going to superimpose this on top of a schedule or a calendar. And what I forgot to mention was, I think it's July, August, and November, we have one meeting in those months. So, you know, it's going to take a little bit longer to get
Right.
stuff done during the summer.
Yep,
Yeah. Yeah.
understood.
If you guys want, I'm just throwing this out there, I could try to put a very short memo together, kind of explaining the different noticing requirements and such like that.
Yeah, absolutely. 'cause-
I think it'd be good to help.
Whatever is on here.
Yeah,
So
yeah, that'd be helpful.
I think this is
Thank you.
great. It's a great overview, and I would absolutely call this an overview and not just a process, because if somebody starts to read this, they're going to think this is the owner's task and this is what it's been oversimplified. We know there's a lot of moving parts that go on in here. So I would absolutely call this a high-level overview, just so people are aware that this is a view of the process.
Yeah.
Did you put this together yourself, Liz?
Thank
This is
I like
good stuff, I like
There
it.
are some, Word provides you with some
Got some help, yeah.
All right, so, I mean, I think we're in agreement, though, that we would like to make a couple of the modifications. I like the qualifying language, and then have this available so the public can see
Yep.
and understand the process as well.
That's fine.
So, we want to be as transparent as possible. So, Tom, why don't you take it away with now talking a little bit more specifically about the approach here?
Yep, thank you. First off, I just want to thank everybody for their input and guidance, and I look forward to the copious amount of work that I'll be giving to all of you. And yes, I will create a spreadsheet, which Deputy Mayor Lavender has seen, as so has Chairman, why am I blanking on their last name? Richardson. King Richardson.
See, it's not just me.
You're rubbing off on me.
I'm like the invisible man.
So you have seen the tracker, and we've actually shown this, this book of work to a couple of subcommittees, like Open Space and Shade Tree have now seen it. And the hopes there is to keep people focused on the tasks at hand, on what we've agreed to, and we can all head in the right direction. And remember, what we put in the master plan are recommendations. They are not must-dos. They are recommendations. So the approach is for the, what I call the ORD, the Ordinance Review Board, will begin the process of assessing changes or amendments to current ordinances. Changes will come from several different sources. They'll come from the guidance of the master plan, results from applications that have come before the Planning Board or the Zoning Board of Adjustment, laws passed by state, federal, or other authorities, or the township or some other governing body. So this is where these things can come from. All matters will be brought before the board and the ORB for discussion. Recommendations will be provided to support those discussions and seek any additional considerations that are raised by this group. Our goal is to address ordinances that have become conflicting, outdated, no longer relevant, new, etc., in an efficient manner. So this does address bulking, so we're not just onesie-twosies through. It's taking a methodical approach on how we're going to address these in the most efficient way possible. It is also fair to say that some, as I stated before, will be more complicated than others, and some will be prioritized over others. The objective is to work through these with that methodical approach, and once agreed by the planning board, we'll send that to the TC for first and second readings, keeping in mind that they may be sent back for further reviews. So that does touch exactly on what Ms. Lahaney has covered. So earlier this year, the chair and myself met with the deputy mayor and Committeeman Brendan to discuss about what would be the planning board's priorities for 2023. And then we applied that, or I should say I applied that to the master plan recommendations, and we'll do the same with the ordinances. So one of those was the zoning maps, which we know that Joe's going to be working on getting the zoning map, because that is the baseline. You know, if we don't start with a solid base, we're never going to get there. So once we do the zoning maps,
Of the existing.
of the existing one, which was last updated in 2016. Right now, I think, Joe, you're putting together the plan and the costs around that, so we can understand what that looks like. And if there's any way we can secure funding from grants or anything else, I would say let's explore those opportunities as much as possible. We'd also like to include in there, there are several maps in the master plan. So the vision is we get a baseline on the zoning maps, then we can build on top of that, because we have the baseline. We can address maps that are in the land use, the zoning, the future land use and commercial centers, parks and open space, existing proposed bike path. Those maps are in there, as well as the roadway network. And hopefully we can get the paper maps in there identified. Another priority is stormwater. That is a big problem here in Long Hill. It's also focusing on areas in need of redevelopment, and also the next round of fair share housing. So those are our priorities for 2024. Did I say 2023?
You
before?
did.
I did. So I'm going to correct that, strike to move last statement 2023 to 2024. So those are the 4 priorities. I did do a review of the master plan. There are over 257 recommendations across 6 elements in the new master plan. I did take that and broke those recommendations down to several categories, like best practice, zoning, project, stormwater, ordinance, education, architectural, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Of those 257 recommendations, 84 fell into best practices. So that's what we do today. And what do we need to keep on doing going forward? The next would be 74 is zoning. So there's all your maps that we're going to need to start leveraging. And then we move into project work. And then stormwater. So I did list out definitions for all of these, and I will share that with everybody so you have it, and so we're all on the same page. And that's what the Ordinance Review Board will also use as a baseline. Now, this was my first attempt to go through that to classify. It's not written in stone. If you see something that should be somewhere else, sticking with the themes that I've put together, happy to move them around.
I think to Deputy Mayor Lavender's question, we want to distill out how many ordinances should come out of that count. Because I don't, it's not that many, because there's.
Well, I've got 12 listed
duplication.
here. I've identified 12 that fall into the ordinance section. But like I said, after, reading 257, I'm sure I glossed over a few of them.
That's fine.
But that's what we'll do at the Ordinance Review Board. I also took a look at the elements to prioritize. And I prioritized everything into 3 classifications, high, medium, low. Anything in the high category was aligned to the priorities set out for 2024. Anything medium is something that might touch it, or it's going to come up in a possible application. And low is just something that we can keep on working on, but doesn't need to be done right away. So I have that breakdown, and we'll be able to provide that. The actions that I'd like to task this board with is, 1, we need to ensure that each element is covered off by a member of this planning board, and associate that with another board or a committee or another commission, because we have Shade Tree Commission, we have Open Space, we have Recs and all this other stuff. Want to make sure that we're liaisoning with those individuals. And I think you had a great conversation with Shade Tree, and I know we had a great conversation with Open Space. We also want to ensure.
And we also met with the environmental.
And you met with the
Commission.
environmental. Okay, so
Had 3, so.
excellent. We also need to ensure that we have planning board representations at these committees. So that way, we're making sure that they're staying aligned with the master plan, and if we have ordinances coming, we have to have a conversation, we need to make a change or review, that we're there to discuss. And to Deputy Mayor Lavender's comment earlier about making sure that we have representation at the township committee meetings. As you know, Scott, I like to come to these meetings and show face, so I'm always coming here. If I can't be here, I'll let you know. And I also know Dennis Sandow likes to attend the meetings. He may attend them virtually or he may come in person, but he's also on those calls. So those are 2 things. Where different committees rely on the elements of the master plan, we should have them review and agree with the classification prioritization. So it's like talking to Shade Tree, showing them the recommendations, how did we classify it, and what priorities we gave them. And then compile a list of ordinances that we need to review and apply with the same approach. Now, I have a template, and that's a template I'm going to share. I don't want people to just send me we've got a problem with this ordinance, this ordinance, this ordinance. No, you're going to follow the template that I have laid out, so this way it can be incorporated in, and we can methodically go after all these issues and go after them and get them done. So that's what I've done at the outset. There are 2 ordinances that have been contested. In the last 2 planning board meetings where we had applications, one being the permitted signs in residential areas, that's LU 155.4, and it says a single ground sign or wall sign indicating a permitted home office, it shall not exceed 4 feet in height or 4 square feet in area. So that's 1 by 4 or 2 by 2. The recommended action based off of a previous application is to amend that ordinance to reduce the size to be no more than 8 inches high and 18 inches long. The other being LU 134.7 is sheds in residential zones. In there, it says maximum shed size is 100 square feet. And we know that based on that conversation, that's not, it exceeds and up to like 200 before they start to enforce any kind of, and I would say recommendation is to increase to 200 square feet. So those would be my recommendations.
And that would be consistent with current UCC code, correct?
Correct, and the language should say something to the effect of anything over 200 square feet will require construction permits in addition to a zoning permit. Anything
Because that has
under-
tax implications now.
Correct.
right?
Anything under 200 square feet, and there's a similar, and I'm sorry to butt this in, but what I just looked at today, again, and I wanted to, I totally forgot. There's a situation in the fence ordinance that's very similar, where we have a maximum fence of, I think it was, I forget the number off the top of my head, but the UCC code has changed, so it's a similar situation in our fence ordinance as well.
Gotcha.
So that would just be a minor update to the ordinance, yeah.
So I think what I would suggest to you is for these two ordinances, that we start the process and that we all kind of walk through it, and this way we actually have a working knowledge of how the process actually works.
Yeah. Whatever makes the most sense from an efficiency standpoint,
Okay?
right?
That-
That's the big thing. I mean, I think that's the.
Yeah, and look, I didn't make these suggestions on my own. It was based off of conversations that took place here while we were in session, and then just applied those pieces. And I guess the last thing I will just cover off at a very high level is the book of work that I've been putting together with regards to recommendations. I've really made this, I've taken the master plan and transposed it into Excel. So I have table of contents, we have goals here, we have definitions I've laid out, outcomes of discussions with open space. I'm not asking the same from, but if you have it, send me the minutes, I'm happy to include this. Where are the maps that we can use? I even created a pivot table for myself, so I kind of live in Excel.
I mean, would it make sense to develop something, a shared document site that people can input information
Yeah,
collectively?
yeah, I mean,
Right.
as long as we're not encroaching on any should not do's, like if we're having conversations and it should be in a public forum, then we should not be having those conversations.
I'd have
if
to look
we're-
at it a little bit deeper, just to,
Okay.
you can't constitute a quorum, but.
I was just
That's,
gonna say
that's where I was going, as
Yeah.
if we're having, if that's
I
a
think it'd make it
side vehicle.
safer, yeah, to just, for individuals to send you emails, just.
I would prefer to do reports and updates at the meetings from when the ORB comes together. So I think the takeaway, besides those two pieces of land use ordinances, the other actions is people should look to see, members of this board should look to see what committees they are going to join, and I think we have some that are already doing that now, and making sure that we're active in those sessions. And I'll stop there for any questions and inquiries.
Any questions or comments?
No, it sounds like a good outline, a good place to start.
Yeah, absolutely.
So thank you for that.
My only comment, and Don, I don't wanna step on your toes, is, for efficiency's sake, to the extent we have already debated certain things, let's just try our hardest to stay focused when we're talking about these
There you go.
ordinances.
Yep.
Some parts of the master plan may have been a little more vague where there does need to be some debate, but for the parts that we've already spent a very long time debating, let's just try to remember.
Not reinvent the wheel.
Efficiency is done at all levels, not just getting
Yes.
information up to the TC, but it's at our conversation level too.
Yes.
We look forward to the DIL
The deal rule.
principle,
Yeah.
right?
Is that-
And we have a DIL principle
Yeah.
in regards to.
Second that.
Stated simply, we're not rewriting the master plan.
Correct.
That
Thank you.
is for sure.
That's correct.
And from your township committee perspective, everything Tom said, including the support of the other committees and such, is that something that you you know,
Say,
ensure
say that
that
whole sentence again.
my jet lag's catching up on me. Go to sleep. I just want to make sure from Township Committee perspective that that message of cooperation with the other committees and, you know, Shade Tree and others is something that you guys, Township Committee,
Absolutely,
will
and to
support
that end, Don and I-
encourage.
Don and I have been at the Environmental Commission and the Shade Tree Commission and
Yeah, I just want to make
taking
sure
the-
that
taking the
doesn't,
road show around. and
doesn't get lost.
The
because
folks
it's-
in the Township Committee understand that you guys have the ball on this and,
Yeah.
Right. We have some really talented volunteers out there in these different committees, and I look forward to the extension to this group. I mean, to make this happen. We've got a tall order of business, and
Yeah.
look forward to
but
working.
David brings up a good point. I mean, we're not throwing it over the transom to other
No.
groups. We're
No.
walking it over and talking.
This is a
to people.
partnership.
Yeah.
This is a
That's all-
partnership.
That's
We all
right, it
live in
has
this
to be.
town.
It has
This
to
is
be.
all volunteer.
Yeah.
I think it benefits everybody if we're all walking in the same direction.
Yeah.
Right.
And I
Sounds
think
good.
Daniel Rogers even proposed to the mayor that the various committees once a month should, or once a quarter, should just come together and meet here to have conversation.
Well, we did talk about once a year or so, at least once a year, that we
We
would
need to do
hear.
more than that. Get off the ground with this, we need to get going.
Whichever frequency, but some sort of
Mhm.
you know,
Right.
I'm happy to meet quarterly.
semi-professional type of
Yeah.
approach
Yeah.
with the committees and response. That's great.
Any other questions or comments for Tom?
No.
At this point? Tom, what are just the next steps then? What can we expect? I mean, you've kind of laid out the priorities.
So,
What would you expect, say, in the near term? And I don't believe, correct me if I'm wrong, do we have an application coming in next meeting?
Yes,
Okay.
Millington Fire.
Firehouse,
Firehouse, okay.
so they have something that needs to go past a TC tomorrow, right? Their fire,
No, they don't need a T, the
is
TC.
the
would-
fees, the waiver of fees?
I
That-
don't know.
That's on the,
Deputy Mayor?
that's on the agenda.
Oh, is the.
The Millington Fire Department, that's on the agenda for tomorrow. right?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Is this a big application for the fire?
It's not a big application, no.
It's
I
the
don't- I-
extension to
honestly, I
incorporate a
don't-
ladder truck, I think it is, the new ladder truck.
It's to this board.
Yeah,
Okay.
The bump out in the back,
yeah.
yeah.
That's
Well,
what-
I
I heard
believe there
Ed
was,
saying
like,
he-
I haven't seen the,
some
I haven't seen the
zone
drawings yet,
change
but
when it's
if you
supposed
say
to
it's a
be
bump
going
out,
to
yeah.
this board.
It's very small.
Okay,
So-
so I
so
think
next
we should be
steps-
able to.
So next
start
steps
squeezing in the
is,
ordinance.
I'm going to send you the template to the group,
Good.
just the template, and I'll have an example so you can see what it is that we're looking for. As I know Dennis knows a lot of the ordinances that have issues, but I'm sure members of this group here know of issues with ordinances. Just start sending them to me in that template. And then that way we can start getting it into the book of work, and then we start working on it. I will set up, I think the ORB should meet maybe on the off cycle of the planning board meeting, if that works for you. And we can come here and meet for an hour and just work through, because I don't want to spend copious amounts of time here, because we all have day jobs too.
You
And
might
start
wanna
getting
take
that book of work.
advantage of Zoom and others.
We
that
can do
people
Zoom,
are-
happy to do Zoom, so we don't have to come here, we can do Zoom. And start getting the book of work going,
I'll come here if you buy the coffee. How's that?
okay? And the other two action points I had was about, let's start signing up to these other committees, making sure that we have representation.
Thank you very much, Tom.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Appreciate it. Great work.
Quick
Yes.
thing to put on everybody's radar. One of the first things in this outline is anybody can initiate the process, right? Anyone that's been authorized. Under the MS4 permit, there are community-wide ordinances that have to be addressed. Some of those were addressed last year. The remainder is the tree removal and replacement ordinance. And so that ordinance was highly contested for a while, disputed, a lot of public hearings. So it's finally gotten to a point of a model draft by the DEP. And it's been circulated, and it's the intention of DEP to have it adopted this calendar year. It was ideally supposed to be by mid-year, but there's been some extensions. That is a task that the Shade Tree Committee is working on currently, on looking at that ordinance and taking the model draft and incorporating the two into a first polished draft to bring towards the TC. So, just wanted to put that on everyone's radar so you could follow their process, see how they've done it, see how we're gonna be doing it, and like you said, getting it into this workflow and trying to do consistency of everything we do as one approach. And perhaps it's something that we could share to other committees as a liaison to them, so that they are not only understanding what our purpose is and what we're proposing, but they get an understanding of a process that they could emulate later. And just help everybody get on the same page across the whole.
By design, it's just supposed to be repeatable.
Exactly.
That's the whole purpose of that.
Joe, are there any other state kind of driven or DEP driven
So there was
needs for ordinances? I thought there was something with the flood hazard, but.
so there were 10 total community-wide ordinances. I believe, I'll double check them, but I believe that we're on 9 or 10. So it would be, we're at the end here. We did salt storage last year.
Okay.
There were 8 original, and then they added private salt storage and this tree ordinance. So we should be.
So
at
that
9
would
or 10.
round out.
That should round out the DEP MS4 permit. Then there's the SCO's stormwater control ordinance.
Right.
And so we'll take a look at that. We're by citation reference, so we're covered. But we could amend it and re-adopt it to bolster it again if we needed to in the future, but, that was addressed.
But I think it goes
Very
without
recent.
saying, we'll distribute this template to our board professionals as well, so
Yeah,
please, we
right.
need your input
Right.
with regards to anything you see
They
that
fell
we
into the
clear-
other category where these things can come from.
Exactly.
So we're pretty well covered on the stormwater side of the master plan in terms of the first efforts of compliance with our MS4. It concerns through the efforts of EPA and others over the last 18 months, and then getting to the point of our inland flood protection rules being properly codified. So we're right there as a great baseline and foundation for that, and then we can look at what other stormwater management things need to be addressed, and floodplain management things need to be addressed, for the specialities of our community.
It's good.
Great. Good.
Right.
Thank you. All right, on to any old or new business. Anybody have anything they can think of?
Something we did before, we had committee reports, like township committee, now and again. So just mention it. We don't have to do anything now, but maybe worth on adding to the agenda as anything else.
Yeah, I mean, we.
So
we
maybe
spent
aware
some
of
time-
ordinances coming down the pipe and stuff.
We wanted to spend some time with the ordinance committee tonight, but,
Yeah.
yeah, we still have our site plan review group that's
Yeah.
working through some of the procedures for that, as well as Dennis and I are still working on the standard operating procedures and bylaws.
It might be just worth an
Right.
additional agenda item for committee updates,
Exactly.
that's all.
Could we just get a Cliff Note overview from the shade tree and environmental meetings that you had?
Yeah,
as a
I think,
feedback?
very simply, I mean, and please, Scott, you can chime in. I think both meetings were very productive. First, to just introduce the concepts of the recommendations that had been called out, thanks to your efforts with regards to what intersects with those particular commissions. There was, I think, a broad acceptance of the recommendations. We also highlighted the process. The one piece of feedback that was given from both groups is, geez, we're not being utilized. We're not seeing applications, we're not
I'm
given
coming.
an opportunity to comment on applications. And I quickly kind of dispelled the myth that we have all these applications that you're not seeing.
Right.
And that we do filter out, for the sake of their sanity and their, efforts as volunteers, to ones that we feel are really applicable. But I said we would pay much more attention to that. Deb is the traffic cop. Yeah, you're working the air traffic control on these things, and I think it's important that we don't filter them too much, that they're not seen or given an opportunity to comment. I don't think we've really had that situation at all with regards to that. Can you think of anything else, Scott, more broadly as far as feedback? I
No,
thought it was positive.
I do though think it would be helpful if we, like, this is flow chart here, right? That's a good flow chart. We probably should have one for floating things through the commissions and give it to them. And it's the kind of thing you laminate it in plastic and put it above your desk so you know what the playbook is, right? They don't know what the playbook is, right? So let's put together a playbook like this for that cycling,
Yeah, and for that key input, absolutely.
right? And also with the time frame around it so we can chug through things quickly.
Right. I think the key thing then is getting, their action items and meeting notes, minutes, so to speak, so that we see what's going on. I definitely made mention that whether it be on a regular basis or certainly periodically, that there would be certain members of this board that would attend their meetings as well, so that there was a sense of continuity. So, all good. And that we need to be receptive. I encourage you, it was fascinating to go and just listen to just some of the expertise that exists in town. I learned a lot in 2 meetings just in regards to a lot of the work that these particular commissions are doing, with especially the 2, with the Environmental Commission and Shade Tree, was a lot of attention toward this invasive species and the concerns around invasive species and the concern about biodiversity, and disease that could affect that biodiversity in our town.
Did I
So
mention-
while we're on that
bamboo?
topic of, because really we're talking about communication, right, between all the different groups in town. And one of the things that we're going to do, we're going to address tomorrow at the Township Committee meeting, we took apart the Communication Advisory Committee, so that's going away. And we'll vote on that tomorrow. I assume that'll go through. And we're creating 2 separate committees. One that just deals with AV, the microphones, Zoom, everything in here. And then a second one, which is going to be called the Digital Engagement Advisory Committee. And that will be website, social media, document management as it surfaces to the public. Because we've really moved into a new age over the last 14 years. Now, the one thing I've noticed, I know Dan Aline is going to be the head of this Digital Engagement Committee. One of the things he's looking at is a website and how do we get our documents out to the public and stuff like that. What we need to do is encourage this board, the zoning board, and the commissions, everybody that's generating official minutes, and get them up on the website, because none of these boards have them on the website now. And we have the ability to put them there, but for whatever reason, maybe we don't do that because we consider that the video is the record, the document of record, but it's really not. We have minutes, the document should be put up there. Because I guarantee you, as we go through this process, there will be some well-deserved criticism from the public for not having it out there. And I think we just owe it to ourselves to get ahead of that and not create headaches for ourselves. So, Deb, if you can help with that, I don't know who posts things, if it's Colette or whatever, right?
Well, there's various people, like I'm in charge of the boards. Colette's probably in charge of the commissions, the committees or what. Megan is probably in charge of the town committee. We all kind of have various responsibilities over different sections of the website.
Right, and so that may be something that I'll bring to the meeting tomorrow in public session with Randy, is like, we need to get that, whoever's gonna curate this stuff, has to be one person, maybe, that curates it. But the bottom line is like, I wanted to go back and look at that, the minutes for the meeting in January when we were talking about this acupuncturist. So I wanted to see who actually testified. I didn't see the minutes. I had to wade through that video. And I think that frustrates people, right?
Agreed.
So, and I don't see shade trees commissions or environmental commission stuff out there either. And we know they do a phenomenal job,
Right.
right? But, let's surface all this stuff so that everybody sees it. And I think that'll help, we've been talking about cultural change, right? You've heard us talking about that, and it starts with trust, and trust starts with transparency and openness. right? So that's where we're taking it.
And taking advantage of the technology as well.
Yeah.
Right.
Very good.
Great.
Generally, yeah, and that's I just am behind in getting updates to the website, so I will definitely be more diligent for the
Right.
boards to make sure that it gets up immediately after approved.
Cool.
Good.
All
Okay,
right.
so the final item, if you would just indulge with me for just 2 minutes. We're 1 day removed from Earth Day, as
Right.
everyone knows. It's hard to believe we're over a 50-plus year anniversary of Earth Day. And I just wanted to do a big shout out to our library. Did a wonderful job of calling out some very interesting books that tie in with Earth Day. You know, we have just such a wonderful library here, and and I just happened to walk by the table, and I picked up a book that's just been fascinating. I just wanted to read 2 excerpts real quick with regards to, it's by Douglas Brinkley, it's Rightful Heritage, and it's a book about the Roosevelts and what they have meant, both Teddy and Franklin, and Delano, their uncle, not as well known, that were instrumental in conservation in this country in the early part of the last century. And I just wanted to read 2 quick excerpts from this book that I think resonate well today. Roosevelt's legacy in conservation was large and contained multitudes. Between 1932 and 1945, the president had also established numerous national forests, many through the acquisition of abandoned or cut-and-cover land. All of these native forests, as Pinchot believed, Pinchot was another very well-known forester out of Yale University who worked with Teddy previously and worked also with Franklin, believe were living testimonials to Roosevelt's unshakable conviction that no landscape, not even the Mojave Desert, should be bereft of robust trees. It is an error to say that we have conquered nature, Roosevelt told Congress more than a decade earlier. We must rather start to shape our lives in more harmonious relationship with nature. This is a milestone in our progress toward that end. The future of every American family everywhere will be affected by the action we take.
Mm-hmm.
And then just finally, just another excerpt at the end I thought that was interesting, was just after FDR won the 1932 presidential election, there was a number of biographical articles that were written about him. When asked what differentiated him from his distant cousin Teddy, President-elect turned instinctively to forestry. Franklin, unlike Teddy Roosevelt, disliked the lumberjack's axe. I like to plant trees, FDR said, not cut them down. And plant he did. From 1933 to 1945, Roosevelt's New Deal conservation programs planted around 3 billion trees from California to New Hampshire, Alaska to Puerto Rico. Planting trees was to FDR a God-affirming act, determined to avoid the long ballyhooed timber famine, sickened by much publicized stories of soil erosion and depletion of the nation's forest resources. Roosevelt, during his 2 terms as governor of New York and his entire 4 terms at the White House, became America's visionary forester-in-chief. So, interesting read. Politics aside, they spanned a very broad political spectrum when you consider Teddy to Franklin and what was going on. But the commonality in regards to preservation and looking at preserving our Earth's resources seemed to really resonate. So I leave you with that for Earth Day. And with that, is there a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favour?
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
Well done.